The Interstellar Combat Classification Commission had spent 4,000 galactic cycles cataloging the galaxy's species
Category
into
7,
tidy threat
minimal
assessment
threat,
boxes.
physically adequate,
Their floating
emotionally
facility
volatile,
hovered above
no
Vex
natural
Prime,
defenses.
a neutral
I read the
planet
waiver.
chosen
We have
precisely
a
because
problem.
it belonged
She's
to
not
no
authorized.
one, and managed to offend everyone with its relentlessly beige landscape. Somewhere in those polished titanium corridors, humans had been filed under Category 7, Minimal Threat. Physically adequate, emotionally volatile, no significant natural defenses. The unofficial
Note
verdict
the
among
inefficient
staff was less
metabolism and
diplomatic.
short lifespan.
The adorable murder apes
Observe
who somehow
quieter.
reached space despite having the natural durability of wet tissue paper. It was not an entirely unfair assessment. Humans carried no armored plating like the Krexith warriors. They couldn't discharge electricity like Volnari shock troops. Their bones snapped under pressures that barely registered the silicon-based species. No venom, no claws worth noting, no regenerative ability. Average reaction time. By every measurable standard, they were extraordinarily, almost impressively, ordinary, which made what happened in the Commission's reception hall that morning all the more interesting. A human woman stood at the registration desk. The clerk, a four-armed Zelthian with a professionally polished superiority complex, barely registered her name. He was too busy suppressing amusement. She was not especially tall, even by human standards, which made her practically miniature by galactic ones. Dark clothing, hair pulled back with zero concern for appearance, eyes that moved across the room the way a predator's do when it isn't currently hunting, but could start at any moment. "You understand," the clerk said, mandibles arranged into what his species considered a courteous smile, "that the Proving Grounds tournament is not a metaphor. Participants die, frequently." "I read the waiver," she replied. There was something in her voice that unsettled him, a calm that had no business existing in the face of obvious danger. "And you still wish to represent Earth?" The way he said Earth made it sound like a particularly forgettable cleaning brand. "That is why I'm here." The clerk stamped her registration with unnecessary force and handed it over. "Arena 7, third rotation. Try not to die too quickly. The crowds do appreciate a show." She took the chip and walked away, leaving him to immediately gossip with his colleague about the human who thought she could fight. The Proving Grounds tournament was, in the grand tradition of civilizations with too much time and too many resources, both completely unnecessary and entirely essential. 600 cycles ago, it had been created to settle territorial
7,
disputes
minimal
without
threat,
actual
physically
warfare.
adequate,
It had
emotionally
since
volatile,
evolved into
no
something
natural
between a
defenses.
sporting event,
I
a
read the waiver.
diplomatic showcase,
We have a
and a
problem.
public
She's
reminder
not
of why
authorized.
certain species should never, under any circumstances, be antagonized. The arena itself was a massive sphere, capable of reconfiguring into any environment imaginable. Frozen tundra, desert wasteland, zero-gravity void, underwater labyrinth, all at the press of a button.
Note the inefficient metabolism
Thousands of
and short
spectators watched
lifespan.
from hovering platforms,
Observe
consuming
quieter.
overpriced refreshments and placing bets that would make casino operators weep with professional admiration. This cycle's roster had drawn particular attention. Thorax, the unyielding, a Krexith warrior standing 3 meters tall, encased in natural armor that had never once been breached across 47 documented battles. Zafina of the Third Moon, a Volnari fighter whose electrical attacks could incapacitate most species before they got close enough to matter. Gurmath, the Breaker, 6-limbed, nearly impossible to grapple, with a skeletal structure built more like architecture than biology. And then there was the human. The betting pools had already formed. Her odds of surviving the first round were astronomical, and not in a favorable way. Most bookmakers listed her as a novelty wager, something to keep the early rounds entertaining. A few spectators placed small bets on her lasting more than 30 seconds, purely for the comedic value. In the preparation area, a space that functioned like a very aggressive waiting room, the human sat alone on a bench designed for beings twice her size. Around her, the other fighters prepared in their respective ways. Thorax had his armor plates polished to an intimidating sheen. Zafina meditated while arcs of electricity danced lazily between her fingers. Gurmath performed what appeared to be interpretive dance, but was actually an intricate series of stretching routines. None of them spoke to her. To speak would be to acknowledge her as a legitimate competitor, and none of them were prepared to extend that courtesy to a species ranked below moderately dangerous space fauna. A Drex researcher, her crystalline body refracting light in patterns that indicated deep academic enthusiasm, stood nearby, recording observations with the serene indifference of someone who views all living things as data points. Humans possess approximately 60% of the muscle density of a Krexith warrior. Their skeletal structure, adequate for their homeworld's gravity, shows vulnerability to impact stress that most robust species would barely register. Reaction time falls in the 42nd galactic
Category 7.
percentile.
Minimal threat.
No natural
Physically
weapons,
adequate.
no
Emotionally
armor,
volatile.
no specialized
No natural
combat
defenses.
adaptations,
I read the
beyond a
waiver.
reasonably
We have a
efficient
problem.
cardiovascular
She's not
system
authorized.
and opposable thumbs. The human did not react. She sat with her eyes half closed, breathing slowly. Furthermore, the Drex continued, warming to her subject. Humans demonstrate notable emotional attachment to outcomes, which compromises tactical judgment. They experience pain
Note
acutely
the
and
inefficient
lack
metabolism
effective
and
biological
short
suppression
lifespan.
mechanisms. In
Observe
summary,
quieter.
from a combat perspective, they are a species that survived predation through tool use and group coordination, rather than individual capability.
Match human.
A quiet
Terra
voice
Earth
cut through
versus
her analysis.
Vexthor the Unstoppable.
You done?
Yarex.
The Drex's
Gamma
crystalline
Sector.
structure flickered of surprise. I was merely stating observable facts. Observe quieter.
The first two matches unfolded as expected. A Talari blade dancer fell to a Zen assault specialist in 6 brutal minutes. Zafina dispatched her opponent in under 2, leaving scorch marks across the arena floor that the crowd immediately lost their minds over. Thorax defeated a Quellan warrior, known for corrosive acid secretions, with grim efficiency, standing victorious while medical teams raced to save his opponent from their own leaked acid. He raised all 4 arms. His armor was barely scratched. The viewing platform shook with approval. Then the announcement came. Next match, exhibition bout. Competitor designation, Human, Terra, Earth. The announcer managed to inject a remarkable volume of skepticism into the word human. Versus Vexthor, the Unstoppable, Yarks, Gamma Sector. The response was immediate. Laughter rippled across the platforms. Joke bets were placed in amounts so trivial the system barely registered them. Fighters who had been focused on their own upcoming matches stopped to watch what everyone assumed would be a very brief, very instructive demonstration of why humans did not belong in serious combat sports. Vexthor had earned his name through straightforward arithmetic. 93 sanctioned matches, 93 victories. His species, the Yarks, were the product of a high-gravity world where natural selection had spent millions of years perfecting one specific thing, not dying. They stood 2.5 meters tall, wrapped in dense muscle over a skeleton reinforced with redundant structural supports. They were, in the most literal sense, biological tanks. Vexthor entered to thunderous applause. His gray-green skin bore the layered scars of a warrior who wore damage like achievement. His hands, each capable of crushing steel, hung ready at his sides. His eyes, small and deep-set, carried the absolute confidence of a being who had never experienced defeat and had already decided he never would. The human entered from the opposite gate. The contrast was almost comedic. Where he was massive, she was slight.
Category 7.
Where he carried
Minimal
decades
threat.
of visible
Physically
battle,
adequate.
she bore only
Emotionally
the ordinary
volatile.
wear
No
of existence.
natural defenses.
Where he
I
moved
read
with
the
the heavy
waiver.
certainty of
We have a
inevitable
problem.
victory,
She's not
she walked with a
authorized.
loose lightness that suggested she might drift away in a stiff wind. The arena had been set to flat terrain, no environmental variables, no advantages, just two fighters and the question of who would remain standing. The referee, a hovering sphere of synthetic intelligence, recited the rules in 14 languages
Note the
simultaneously.
inefficient metabolism
Standard
and
protocols,
short lifespan.
no weapons beyond natural
Observe
ability,
quieter.
no outside interference, fight until submission or incapacitation. Death was discouraged but not technically prohibited, which said something
Match.
rather dark
Human
about galactic
Terra
sporting
Earth
culture.
versus Vexthor
Fighters,
the
ready.
Unstoppable. Yarex,
Vexthor
Gamma
dropped into a
Sector.
combat stance refined across 93 victories, 4 arms perfectly positioned, weight balanced for explosive forward movement, every muscle primed. The human stood with her hands at her sides. Begin. What happened next would be analyzed, replayed, debated, and argued about for the next 100 standard cycles. Vexthor moved first. His strategy was the one that had always worked: close distance, overwhelm with superior reach and mass, and end it before the opponent could organize an effective response. He crossed the 10 meters between them in under 2 seconds, 4 arms already reaching to grab and crush and finish. The human did not retreat. She moved forward, inside his reach, her body shifting in a way that seemed to quietly disagree with basic physics. She flowed around his grasping arms like water moving past stone. And then she struck. One motion, precise, economical, almost elegant. Her arm swung in an arc from her hip, rotated through her torso, accelerated through her shoulder, and terminated with her fist making contact with a very specific point on Vexthor's neck, just below the angle of his jaw. The sound was not dramatic, no thunderous crack, no cinematic impact, just a solid, unremarkable thunk, like a hammer finding hardwood. Vexthor's forward momentum stopped completely. All 4 arms went limp. His eyes rolled back in an expression that suggested his brain had just received information it fundamentally did not know how to process. His legs, powerful, never-defeated legs, quietly decided they no longer wished to support his weight. He fell, not slowly, not dramatically. He simply dropped, like someone had cut his power at the source. 300 kilograms of undefeated Yark's warrior hit the arena floor with a sound that made spectators wince in sympathetic pain. The arena went completely silent. The referee bobbed uncertainly, as if its sensors were showing it
Category
something
7.
it needed to a
Minimal
moment
threat.
to confirm.
Physically
The
adequate.
human stood over
Emotionally
Vexthor's
volatile.
unconscious
No natural
form,
defenses.
breathing steadily,
I read the waiver.
expression
We have a
unchanged,
problem.
the calm
She's
of
not
someone who had
authorized.
just completed a routine task, like filing paperwork or taking out the trash. 5 seconds. 10. Vexthor did not move. Competitor Vexthor is unconscious, the referee announced, recovering itself. Neural activity indicates no permanent damage. Complete temporary incapacitation
Note the
confirmed.
inefficient metabolism
Winner,
and
human
short
competitor.
lifespan.
The silence
Observe
shattered.
quieter.
The arena erupted, not quite into cheering, more into the collective sound of several thousand beings simultaneously attempting to verbally process something
Match.
impossible.
Human
The
Terra
betting
Earth
platforms
versus
experienced what could only be
Vexthor the
described as a
Unstoppable.
computational
Yarex,
breakdown,
Gamma
their
Sector.
systems scrambling to pay out odds that no one had genuinely expected to collect. In the competitors' area, Thorax stood with all 4 arms hanging forgotten at his sides, staring at the replay display. Zafina had lost control of her electricity. Small sparks escaped her in uncontrolled bursts. Gurmath had frozen mid-stretch in a position that looked deeply uncomfortable. The Drex researcher had dropped her recording device entirely. Medical teams flooded the arena floor and confirmed what everyone had witnessed but struggled to accept. Vexthor the Unstoppable had been rendered unconscious by a single strike from a Category 7 species. The human walked calmly toward the exit, passing the medical teams, passing the still confused referee, passing back through the gate into the preparation area where every single fighter was now staring at her. She picked up her water bottle, took a drink, sat back down on the bench designed for beings twice her size. The analysis began almost immediately. This was, after all, a galaxy populated by scientists, strategists, and beings who prided themselves on understanding how things worked. The replays ran at normal speed, then in slow motion, then frame by frame. The Drex researcher had recovered both her device and her composure. Strike mechanics indicate precise anatomical targeting, specifically the vagus nerve cluster, inducing immediate neural shutdown. Force distribution suggests understanding of biomechanical principles that significantly exceeds Category 7 assessment parameters. A Krexith combat analyst reached the same conclusion from a different direction. She did not strike hard, she struck precisely. Human knowledge of biology is apparently far more weaponized than we assumed. A Volnar physicist added, "Energy efficiency ratio is unprecedented, minimal force for maximum effect. We have been optimizing for power, they have been optimizing for economy." The humans' odds of advancing, which had been listed that morning as a galactic joke, quietly became those
Category
of a legitimate
7,
contender.
minimal threat,
In the medical
physically
bay,
adequate,
Vexthor
emotionally
regained
volatile,
consciousness with
no
the deeply
natural
confused
defenses.
expression of
I read the
someone waking
waiver.
up in entirely
have
the
a
wrong
problem.
location.
She's not
The
authorized.
medical team explained that he had been knocked out in under 3 seconds by a human. His response, translated from Yarks, was not suitable for public broadcast. The tournament did not pause for existential crisis, even species-wide ones. The human advanced through the bracket with the same quiet efficiency. The pattern repeated itself
Note
across
the
match
inefficient
after match.
metabolism and
Opponent
short
underestimates,
lifespan.
opponent attacks.
Observe
Human
quieter.
moves with that fluid, impossible economy. A single strike, and the opponent falls. She varied her targets each time, demonstrating what several analysts described as an uncomfortably comprehensive knowledge of galactic anatomy, nerve clusters, joint structures, pressure points that most species didn't even know they possessed, each strike calibrated with surgical precision. By the time she reached the finals, academic papers were being frantically drafted across the galaxy, combat manuals were being revised, the Interstellar Combat Classification Commission had convened an emergency session to discuss immediate reclassification of humanity. The final match was against Thorax. Of course it was. He stood in the arena looking across at the human who had quietly become the most alarming Category 7 species anyone had ever encountered. "I have watched your matches," he said, his voice carrying the grinding quality of stone on stone. "You fight with knowledge, not strength." "Yes," she replied. "My armor has never been breached." "I know." "You cannot strike what you cannot reach." "We will see." Thorax did not charge blindly. He had learned from watching. He approached with patience and deliberate caution, arms positioned, armor forward. He would give her nothing. He would wait for his opportunity and then be absolute. The human waited with her hands at her sides. They circled, Thorax looking for an opening that didn't create a vulnerability, the human watching with those dark, unrevealing eyes, patient as stone. Then Thorax moved, a carefully controlled strike designed to force her to dodge into a compromised position. She didn't dodge, she stepped into the strike, her left arm rising to redirect rather than resist his force, using his momentum to spin herself inside his guard. Her right hand made contact with his wrist. Not a strike, just a touch. Thorax felt his arm go numb. Before he could process this, her other hand found his elbow. More numbness. She was inside his guard now, too close for his reach to matter. Her hands moved in rapid, precise sequence, touching points on his arms, his shoulders, his torso, each contact exact, each one calibrated. Then he understood with the dawning weight of certain defeat what she was doing.
She wasn't trying to breach his armor. She was systematically deactivating the nerve clusters controlling his movement. His armor, his great impenetrable defense, was entirely irrelevant. One arm stopped responding, then another, then all four hung useless at his sides. He tried to move his body, to do anything. She touched his hip, his knee, his ankle. Thorax the unyielding, armor fully intact, never once breached, folded to his knees, his body completely unresponsive, his defenses perfect and utterly meaningless. The human stepped back, breathing slightly harder than before. Winner, human competitor. The crowd's reaction was not quite applause, not quite silence, something between stunned respect and a deep, uncomfortable reckoning with everything they thought they understood about combat.
In the aftermath, as the human collected her prize and prepared to return to Earth, the Commission released its revised assessment. Humans, Category 2, Potential Threat Level, Extreme, Physically Average, demonstrably expert in biological vulnerabilities across species, prone to strategic over-emotional thinking, possesses adaptability exceeding all previous assessment parameters. The unofficial verdict among the more honest staff, the terrifying apes who apparently spent their entire evolutionary history learning exactly where to hit things, and we should probably never, under any circumstances, make them angry. The Drex researchers' final report included an observation that would become widely quoted in academic circles. Previous assessment focused entirely on what humans cannot do. We failed to examine what they chose to learn instead. They did not evolve armor, so they learned where armor was weakest. They did not evolve overwhelming strength, so they learned precisely how much force was necessary. They are not the strongest species, nor the fastest, nor the most durable. They may be the most efficient. That, it turns out, is significantly more dangerous. The human herself, asked by reporters how she felt about her victory and the reclassification of her entire species, gave an answer that was very human in its simplicity. People confuse violence with effectiveness. We learned a long time ago that knowing exactly where to hit once is better than hitting everywhere repeatedly. It's not about being stronger, it's about being smarter. She boarded her transport and left behind an arena full of beings who were suddenly, acutely aware of something they had overlooked. Humanity had spent its entire existence on a planet where everything was trying to kill everything else. And unlike most species, humans had not responded by becoming harder to kill. They had responded by becoming very, very good at it, efficiently. Back at the Commission, bureaucrats quietly added new categories to their assessment criteria: anatomical knowledge, strategic efficiency, adaptive learning, biomechanical understanding. New frameworks that measured intelligence and education alongside raw physical capability. And in the break rooms, in the quiet moments between the paperwork and the revisions, they spoke in hushed tones about the human who had won a tournament, not through power or natural advantage, but through the simple, patient, terrifying efficiency of knowing exactly where to strike. The galaxy had underestimated humans for a straightforward reason. They had been measuring the wrong things entirely. What they failed to understand, until a tournament and 7 defeated opponents had demonstrated it clearly, was that humans had something far more dangerous than natural weapons. They had the methodical, unhurried ability to study every other species' vulnerabilities and remember them until needed. It was never about being the strongest. It was about being the species that noticed that every other species had a very specific place they did not wish to be struck. And humans were very, very good at remembering such things.